Eventually in life, you kids out there, you'll have to recognize that the world isn't fair. And sometimes things happen that shouldn't happen at all, for a variety of reasons that we're gonna get to. And one of those things that tends to happen is the scrapping of steam engines. Now, historically speaking, there has been valid reason to do so. We can't save all of them, of course. It's just a thing that has to happen. But I think most people in the modern day agree that we probably should just stop freaking doing that, because we're running out of those. And some have the idea of, well, we could just save one of each type and it's fine. Yeah, it doesn't work, because what if something happens to that one? You know, like a hurricane or a tornado or a fire. I mean, we should save a few, you know, when we can, when things are reasonable, when it's possible. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like we can save every single one of them, but I think we should try our best, you know. And it's always frustrating to hear about a preserved steam engine that survived the end of steam getting scrapped in the modern day. And by modern day, I mean 2018! I'm gonna have to simmer down here. Don't want to get too mad yet. For this, exceedingly depressing story, we go to Germany. And before we begin, I want to thank one of my regulars over in the Discord server, Gafar G. Mit Gafar, who shared the actual details of this particular story, as sources online are pretty scant regarding what exactly happened with this engine. But with his help, as well as looking through what sources I could find, I was able to piece together the gist of the story, and boy howdy is it just one disaster after another for an engine that really seemed to have every opportunity to still be around. Sadly, no longer. Her name was 528171. Yep, that rolls right off the tongue. And she was a German locomotive, built originally in 1944, and one of the 200 members of the DR Class 52.80s. The engines were updated in 1960 to the 52.80s, and they were fairly large, 210-0s. They were successful, all things considered, and carried forward right up until the end of steam on the Deutsche Reichsbahn. And by that I mean 1988. What? Germany, what the heck are you... What? Well, whenever we talk about this story, we have to discuss East Germany. The 52.80s were carried out by East Germany behind the Iron Curtain, and due to various reasons, they held on to steam traction for a heck of a lot longer than most places. And as a direct result, a lot of this family wound up preserved. Like, way more than you'd think. Like, a little over 100. Yeah, seriously. Over 100. What? Really? You managed to save that many out of 200? Over half? And yeah! The reason is likely that by the 1980s, the Germans had seen, well and good, what happened to a lot of the steam engines in other places. Over in the UK, here in America, down in Australia, all sorts of locations, who were just like, yeah, let's just destroy all of them. And the preservation movement had to scramble to save as many as they could. Because they held on to theirs for so long, East Germany was, well, ready for when that inevitably happened. And the Deutsche Reichsbahn was happy to sell a lot of these engines to private individuals, so as a result, a lot of this type wound up surviving. Which does make the loss of 8171 a bit less of a big deal, as there are a ton of her sisters still around. Also, it was still completely avoidable and annoying and obnoxious, and... let me explain. 8171 was originally purchased off the Deutsche Reichsbahn in 1995 by a private individual, who cosmetically restored her, but then sold her off in 1997 to an organization called the Herzbergbahn Association. They had big plans for her, as she was placed in what they called the Lohmühlen Museum. Lomulen Museum. I think that's how you say it. Which is located in Georgenthal, Tombach, Dethars, Thuringia, and she arrived there in May of 1998. Now, despite the name, Lomulen Museum, this wasn't exactly a museum. I think they intended for it to be eventually, but what it really was an old station, one that wasn't being used anymore, and it was located on the abandoned line of the Herzbach-Bahn. This caused her to be placed outside, but the intention of the association was to utilize her eventually on the line after they obtained ownership of it from the Deutsche Reichsbahn. They wanted to run heritage services, so this was all incredibly well intended by them. However, getting a hold of the line was a lot more difficult than getting a hold of the engine. While the Deutsche Reichsbahn was more than willing to sell off the old steam rolling stock, selling lines was a little bit more complicated. The Deutsche Reichsbahn wanted quite a bit of money, and they were probably highballing them because during that period, the Deutsche Reichsbahn wasn't particularly interested in selling stuff to be used for, actual railway operations, because that would result in competition for them. Granted, I'm pretty sure the intention here was not to necessarily compete. I mean, it's a heritage line. A lot of heritage lines don't necessarily run service in the traditional travel sense, it's like a ride. And even if they were doing that, you weren't using that line anyway. It was abandoned. That was the whole point. But in any event, they struggled to actually finalize a deal, and negotiations dragged on until 2006. They still hadn't arrived at an arrangement by that time, and that year, the nearby town of Tombach-Dethars decided they actually wanted to purchase the property. The Deutsche Reichsbahn was more willing to sell to the town, and the town likely had access to more immediate funds. And as a result, the town obtained ownership of the trackage and got it completely decommissioned in 2008, so no one could use it at all for a train anymore. This was a big problem for the association because not only did they not have the trackage they wanted to use for heritage runs, but also, with it being decommissioned, they couldn't actually move 8171 with relative ease. Prior to then, they could have just wheeled her out on the line and taken her somewhere else if they had to. That wouldn't have been a major deal, but now they had no choice but to take her by road. And she was a big engine at 210-0. That was not cheap to do it that way. It put them in quite a bit of a pickle. And for another decade, she pretty much just sat there, not doing anything or being used for anything. She was on display, sure, but she'd been exposed to the elements. That cosmetic restoration began to wear down, and she started looking a bit rough. Granted, even towards the end of things, she still looked alright, salvageable. She was hardly a pile of rust. You could tell she'd been out for a bit, but the notion of restoring her, at least visually, was still on the table. But 2017 put the final nail in her coffin. The town, once again, would step in and decided that they wanted to make the old line into a bike trail. Why is it always bike trails? I swear, that happens more times than I care to count. It's always, we don't need that track anymore. Bikes! Okay, whatever. Anyway, they told the association that we want to make that area a bike trail, and we want your locomotive off the property. And that was a really sweet request, that's great. The association reminded them that they were the ones who had torn up the line and made it impossible for them to move her. So, what the heck? Well, the town didn't yield, basically saying they had to remove her somehow, and it didn't matter if she was in pieces. The association scrambled and tried to find a way to get her out of there, but again, the only way was by road, and they just couldn't afford it. They did attempt to sell her, perhaps to a wealthier party who might be able to pull that off, but because of the situation, any potential buyer would have had to pay the transport costs, because she had to be moved no matter what. As a result, absolutely no one took on that responsibility. No one wanted to. It was too expensive. The fact that she had so many sisters also really worked against her, because there were just other examples of the same type. She wasn't one of a kind, so there weren't many scrambling to save her. when she just wasn't unique. And time eventually ran out. In July of 2018, the valuable parts that were left on her were stripped off, and what remained was scrapped on site. 8171 was gone. It's a sad end for an engine that had a chance to survive. I mean, I can't even get mad at the association. They had the best of intentions, but everything they tried was just stonewalled. They couldn't get the ownership of the line, the town refused to cooperate with them, they couldn't afford to move the engine, and then the town was like, we would love to make a bike trail there, please move the locomotive that we made sure that you had no way of moving. Like, really? Really? That's not very cash money of you. But as I said, at least in this instance, she wasn't the last of her kind. There are a ton of 52s out there. Both the .80 versions as well as the original 52s. So, we haven't lost the type. You can still see plenty of her sisters. But these kind of situations are always frustrating. Because I don't think anyone really wants to see a steam locomotive scrapped in the modern day. Even if we can afford to lose one or two of a certain type, I just feel like we should still try to avoid it, you know? But yeah, she's gone. Till next time, this is Darkness and a Biduella. Farewell.